on speed ties and can be outplayed and can be played to beat these decks that do way more predictable things. But again, the hidden information is just too scary, right? If you go for the weird opener and your opponent plays something that's more favored against that opener with their standard opener, you suddenly feel like an idiot. I don't blame the players for being safe here. So we are in this situation again. Actually, this was the deciding game matchup from last series. And at that turn 2 flip, Frozen lost, right? But still came down to a very, very close matchup between the Die Insect setup by Tice and Frozen potentially getting the Baron Geddon to go off. I wonder if we're going to see a similar pan out. I'd also like to see potentially Tice try and win from a position where he loses the turn 2 flip, because that's still possible for Shadow Samuro in my opinion, but quite difficult indeed.
Yeah, it is something you have to plan for, and something that makes this mode quite unique. Because there are a limited number, obviously, of your opponent's mercenaries, you know what their abilities are. That is just clear. If you play someone back-to-back like this, you do learn, right, throughout that, whether it's what to do differently or what not to do. There is still a learning process going on, so we are going to see yet again this Diablo on 10 health, as we saw it in the previous game of the last series. And Tice, what he did previously was go for the snipe with the Nat, which he has queued up, and then aim everything at Ken. Do you think that is just still the same plan? It looked very clean in the previous game.
It did. I mean, I was wondering if Frozen could go for a juke, if that's the case. Because the Diablo actually only goes to the 10 breakpoint because it takes retaliation damage from the attacking the Vol'jin, which is at 6 attack. So if he attacks the Natalie, it actually then goes to 11. But the problem with that is Vol'jin is not giga slowed, right? It's only slowed by Varden, and
Yep.
then the Vol'jin can go for Curse of Weakness, and that also can beat the Endurance Aura Flip while killing the Diablo even from 11 health. So it works out the same, but Tice did it again. Okay. So Frozen has to kind of replicate what he did last game and find a way to get the Baron Geddon to be healthier for the point of the game where Tice ends up on his Ragnaros, right? If things will pan out up to that point, similarly how they did last game.
Yeah, and this is where decision points change, right? Obviously, the openers were the same. Frozen lost the tie again, like he did in the last game. But one, like as you mentioned, he could have altered the health pool a little bit and decided to try something else. Decided against it and just wanted to flip that coin. But now he has the choice. Does he want to mimic what he did in the previous game and just hope things turn out a little bit better? Or does he want to divert and start something else? Again, I imagine the Ragnaros is off the table, right? I don't think that's ever a choice. But the choice between the Baron and the Tavish is where things can change. And it looks like Frozen has gone for Tavish this time around.
Yeah. This is what I thought he would do last game. I think he brought in Baron Geddon from this position, right? And honestly, it was fine. It just didn't die for a long time because there was no typing advantage, assuming that you just kill the Samuro immediately, which is, still a bit of a flip, actually, right? Because the Varden is at 5 speed and the Samuro Mirror is also at 5 speed. But with the Baron Geddon last time, right, Frozen could have queued 3 things at 5 speed, which I think gives him an advantage in winning speed ties. It's not confirmed. I have yet to get a response from a dev asking how speed ties actually work when multiple skills are involved in the tie. But in this case, the Tavish will be able to set up a pretty early explosive trap, and that's the way that Frozen's going to try and get rid of the blues here. I still think Tice should do the same thing that he did last game, though, from this position, even though there was now a Tavish instead of a Geddon, and that is target the Karen heavily. The last thing you want here is for the Earth Stomp to come out. Even if Diablo is out of the equation, that slow can potentially let Frozen get, say, an aimed shot or something like that Tice will not prefer. Or like he'll have less control over what target that goes on.
Something that I've been enjoying watching as well is like, although roping is normally negative term in constructed, it important there to that these players really do sit and work out exactly how they can see these attacks going. And this looks a little bit better for Frozen this time round, right? He did manage to peel off
Yeah.
2 of those mercenaries. There's an 8 health Vol'jin just knocking around now, which again just makes this decision from Tice. I mean, it's probably going to be Ken Diablo at this point with that combo, but still, just having one very low health mercenary to start a turn feels bad, because a lot of the time you feel like on a lot of mercenaries that low health is almost going to always die and do nothing, right? Like you feel it's going to achieve very little, so it's like you're playing with 2 mercenaries next turn, which is a little bit rough.
Yeah, very good point, honestly, because I think Tice might have preferred his Vol'jin to also be here. I don't think there was an outcome from Frozen here, but it's the same thing with Frozen's Cairn, right? It's essentially -1 board space because they are just never doing anything this turn before they die most of the time. That's not necessarily true for the Vol'jin, because in order for Frozen to kill this Vol'jin before it moves, he has to dedicate, like, I mean, he has to play Cold Snap, right? Because the Flurry doesn't kill it. The Explosive Trap is not guaranteed to get rid of the Vol'jin, and the aim shot is too slow. But because Tice has Endurance Aura here, he is potentially able to kill the Varden before it can even go for Cold Snap. And the Karen's Endurance Aura is very, very slow. It's just not going to work.
Yeah, because this AoE, it's going to remove a lot of that, because of course Varden will kill the Vol'jin, I think, no matter what this turn, because Varden should die, and then the Death Rattle will, like, sort of Cold Snap anyway, right, and deal 8. So that Vol'jin should go down no matter what. So yeah, it's a bit of a weird turn here from Tice, and again, I talk about this a lot, where losing mercenaries isn't necessarily bad unless it's your last one, because you can bring in powerful synergies together on board. Like as you mentioned, like no Vol'jin here would mean he could drop Rag as well and have like a full strength fresh board to be able to just pop off against a slowed or reasonably slowed team to an extent. So it was sometimes it can be tough. There's going to be the Explosive Trap here from Tavish, makes absolute sense. But big AoE here from Vol'jin, and at least he got something off, right? Like that's a good bonus. Vol'jin achieved something, and now with the Ragnaros coming down from Tice, it completely negates the freeze side of this Varden Death Rattle.
Looking at it holistically, the Vol'jin achieved pretty much just 14 damage on Tavish. The damage on the other 2 mercs didn't matter because Diablo was going to kill them anyway by my count. But it's something. Like, every damage breakpoint matters, right? We saw that 45 on Tavish last game be the difference maker that allowed him a chance to survive the Die Insects turn. Though what was really sad for Frozen is that his Cairn never got to do anything in that turn. And I think he could have a pretty good read that Tice was going to go for the Earth Stomp. So I think he went for the best possible play in the world where there was a Stomp, which is just get your explosive. So at least you can put some damage on the Diablo Cairn. It does mean, though, that there's no explosive for this turn, which would technically damage more mercs, right? Because the explosive didn't matter on hitting Vol'jin because the Varden was going to kill it anyway.
Correct.
Now it's kind of like, do you think your Tavish can die before you get the aim shot? And is it even aim shot? It could be Bear Trap again, which is what Frozen went for last game. I think makes some sense here. The Ragnaros is fresh on Frozen side, and he can get some nice AoE on the Diablo, and it still would combo and trigger the Living Bomb, right? Because of the side damage. Ooh. Okay, but the Meteor kills the Yaden because of the Apocalypse combo.
Yeah, so much damage now, but everything's so weak here in a roundabout way for both players, right? 2 health Diablo. The Ken obviously got popped, but now does have that Endurance Aura. The Rag can maybe get some work done, but this is tricky. Is this going to be another Die Insect here for Tice?
Absolutely. I was going to say absolutely, but okay, I'm trying to work out if it's necessary, right? Because all of your stuff's going to move before Frozen does anything because you have Endurance Aura and Frozen is slowed by Cairn here. So I don't know what the Magma Blast accomplishes. It does have critical damage, so it puts the Tavish down to 17. Okay. Yeah, okay, that does accomplish something. It guarantees that Tavish dies before doing anything this turn, right? Because Fire Stomp's gonna deal 18 AoE. with two things not having moved yet. So that 17 health is a break point, and that will guaranteed isolate the Rag. So a good spot by Tice here.
Yeah, that's the plan overall, right? Because I think Tice is just taking that approach of, if I can't do anything big, if I can't win the game now, I'll remove one minion, and even though the rest of Tice's mercenaries are relatively weak, it's 3v1, right, against a Ragnaros. So there is a potential die insect for Frozen here, but I think it's not... Oh, no, he used it last turn, right? He used die insect last turn, so he's not got it. And instead...
Die insect doesn't have cooldown, though.
Oh, he just wanted to snipe the Diablo. Sorry, yeah, it's Meteor. Yeah, of course. So he sniped the Diablo, and suddenly 41 health and 18 on the Cairn looks pretty good, especially with it being slowed. And that should just be done, dusted. That's going to be game number 1, going in the same fashion of game number 5 from the last series, and Tice takes the victory.
Right. Big deal that Tice, of course, won the turn 2 flip. Based on that going not so close as it did last time, I wonder if it really was supposed to be Geddon in P4 there rather than the Tavish. I really don't know. Like, my first instinct was Tavish, so I really don't blame Frozen for it. It's just that there's so many ways it can pan out depending on how some speed ties go in the middle, whether your opponent mind games you or not. But I want to shout out to Tice at the end game there for locking it out. I think it was super tempting to go for Die Insect on the turn where there was Tavish and Rag still on the board, because you're like, oh, if I just hit the Tavish first, I can get even more damage on the Rag. But in the world where you lose that 50-50, you don't even kill Tavish that turn. And maybe Frozen gets a very good explosive chop, or I forget if it's aim shot that turn, but one of those things off. And then that can give Tice a window to lose. So I think he spotted the 100% line, which is to go for the Magma Blast for 20 damage, and then get the 18 damage Earth Stomp and guarantee the kill on the Tavish, and making sure you had 3-1 versus the Ragnaros, which is simply impossible for Frozen to win from.
Yeah, and I think we saw there, obviously that speed tie went the same way early on in the game, but I think we saw that both players just altering the game plan a little bit, right? We saw Frozen test out bringing Tavish in instead because Geddon didn't work in the previous one, and then obviously we saw Tice have to adapt to that himself, and also maybe that was a little bit easier because Tavish did look weaker. Maybe the explosive trap should have been held a turn, but if you hold explosive a turn, then it means it's coming off cooldown a turn later again in the game. So really tricky to just work all these panouts and see what happens, but it does mean EU is leading now in 1 game. But we did see America's lead 2-0 in the last match, and then EU brought it back, so still plenty to play for. But it does mean that deck from Team EU is going to be done and dusted, because this is the conquest format in Mercenaries, where if you win with a deck, it is going to be gone, and you have to win with every deck you have available. And again, unfortunately, the MAM deck is going to be gone from this, as this is both players banning it out right now.
So sad. My creation / China's creation. So proud of it. But I mean, I guess it getting banned every time just indicates it's the bring, I suppose.
Yeah.
I'm glad that we have Vol'jin also on the highlight here, because I think I honestly didn't notice this at the time, but Tice had a very clever turn where he went for Vol'jin skill 1, even though he had skill 3 available, just to slow Frozen's Cairn for the next turn. Because remember when we saw the 16 health Cairn that was just going to die to Fire Stomp? And could not do anything about it. In fact, it was just buffing the Fire Stomp by being another thing that's not moving on that turn. So that's another guaranteed stomp going off. Tice, I think, navigated that setup very well. His own Vol'jin still got to do a little bit of damage to the Tavish, and that 14 damage that he got was the difference maker that allowed him to then get the Fire Stomp breakpoint to actually kill the Tavish immediately. So all these things have rolling implications, and I think that game just got super interesting after the speed tie on turn 2. It's just very cool, that matchup in particular. But from here on out, there's a much higher likelihood that we see speed up Mercs plus Samuro Merc opener back and forth, and that one can get pretty janky because the speed ties happen for several turns in a row.
Yeah, and I think again, just touch on Vol'jin. For me, generally speaking, you would have assumed that Vol'jin shouldn't have got that AoE off, right? As you broke down nicely there and just pushed that extra damage. Like normally, you'd feel that shouldn't happen. But I do agree, Tice had the setup really nice, and I think it is beneficial, maybe even for both players, especially the winning player, to actually have played the same matchup back to back, because then you're not thinking about anything else. There's no gaps between the sort of matches, or the game, should I say, so that you can focus on exactly what could and what couldn't go wrong. It looks like, just give me 1 second. We're just getting some information here that I'm just checking out about the next game we have coming up, I believe, and we'll find out in just a second. But generally speaking, do you think this is going to be another 5-game series? Do you think because the decks are so similar, because the players are so now practiced in these mirrors, that we are just going to see it go all the way to the last game?
Could go either way. It really depends to me if somebody decides to just break serve, right? If we're kind of treating this, I know it's Conquest, but the way the decks are so similar, it can also seem a little bit LHS in the sense that you need to pull something interesting out the bag to really gain a significant advantage. In LHS, in Constructed, that usually means winning with an unfavorable. And maybe in Mercs, that means starting with a non-standard opener. But like, again, if you haven't put in the time to test that opener and you're not confident you can achieve that, then maybe you're losing some percentage. And that's why we've seen players going for safe openers every single time. But there's the world where, you know, you haven't tested it, but your opponent hasn't tested it either. And maybe you can think on the fly a little bit better in that instance. And maybe that's going to be the difference maker in this series. I really hope to see it from Team EU. Hunter Ace especially is so proficient with changing his openers around and trying to get the unexpected points versus his opponents. I think it's there's definitely the potential there. Aside from that, I also wanted to say something at the time you were searching up that information, and I've just remembered what it is now, because you brought up that how the players were probably very practiced by now, especially like, do you want to play the same matchup potentially back to back because you just saw how it panned out in game 1? Honestly, even though you know, can memorize moves for a certain turn, it's really hard to keep track of everything unless like you've taken a VOD and recorded it and you can completely memorize everything that happened. You have to account for speed ties as well, because even if you do the same action, it might not pan out the same way depending on how the speed tie goes. And I just could not do it. There were so many times in practice with Surrender where I was like, okay, let's do that same opener, run it back, and we'll run it until the speed tie goes the other way. And I'm like, wait. What did we do until this point? And then it's just like,
and then it all goes wrong.
Testing and mercs. Yeah, it all starts to fall apart. But if you do something different then, because you don't quite remember what happened last game, sometimes that leads to discovering a new strategy, and then you can follow that line as well. It's a maze. Mercenaries is a maze in the best possible way, in my opinion.
So we do have our next game coming up. I do believe they're just checking something before they get into it. I think there might have just been a potential rematch due to just a small thing. The equipment's been wrong on one of the mercenaries. So we're just going to check that out. But while we do, we're going to just hop to a quick break just while we make sure everything's good to go for the next game. So don't go anywhere, guys, and we'll be right back with some more mercenaries. Welcome back, everyone. We are ready to dive into the next game of this series. An important series it is. If EU can win this match, it does mean that there's effectively 2 chances for them to qualify into the final against the America's Battleground team. But already we're diving straight into turn 1, Gia, so break it down for us. It's a mirror.
Yep, and the standard play is to double target Malfurion with your 2 casting effects, and then finally target with the Samurow's double strike. And it's important to have 2 possible triggers for double strike here, because one of those 4-speed attacks is Brukan with the slow effect, and the slow effect, if that slows your Malfurion, you might lose like a proc for the Samuro here. And depending on the order of the Brukan moves, one of the Malfurions will be slowed for the next turn. And it also ended up having less health here because Luna's moves went first, so it kind of means that she missed nature healing. So it's actually in some ways better to go second. Kind of weird how this happens.
It's something you find out really quick when you play this mirror, right? Where at first you're like, oh, come on, let me go first, like you are normally. And then you go, wait a minute. You look at the health on everything, you're like, hang on, I wanted to go second. No.
Yep.
So yeah, even that... even like the small extra health on Samuro can make a difference. Obviously, it's difficult to work out exactly how because it depends on how the turns play out. But just having more health on anything is more helpful than not 9 times out of 10. So we'll see if it makes a difference so far. I do believe, the because of what you were breaking down earlier with the order of the muddy footing that Tice's Brukan did, it does mean that the Luna's Malfurion is going to be slowed for this turn, right?
Okay, Luna wins speed tie here, which is very big. It means that the muddy footing from Tice doesn't one-shot the Malfurion. Tice will have to have sent at least one more thing into the mouth to get rid of it. And he didn't respect that possibility. Granted, he had 2 abilities that could have gone before the Brukan from Luna, but she won the 1-2 speed tie. Well, at least I believe Tice went for the muddy, the Cenarian Ward on his own Malfurion. And that's a very big deal, the fact that it survives. However, there is the chance to abuse the fact that Malf is alive with a cookie snipe, but that 11 health is very deceiving. A lot of the time, that's just going to snowball into 23 before Cookie can even move, and that's just out of range of the snipe here. So I think it is probably Karen here. You accept that Malf's going to get some extra damage. Very sad, but at least you can kill it with... It's not even guaranteed, right? Because of the double healing. Like, this is all such an implication that I haven't really tested, because I think you're supposed to send everything at Malf that turn again, even though it looked low health.
I think you are right, and this is one of those circumstances we were talking about earlier where sometimes you do have to overcommit to make it happen, and if something just throws an ability out elsewhere or whatever, as a worst case, you're like, well, the ability still happens, right? Your character doesn't do nothing if the character it targeted is dead. It just aims somewhere else. So yeah, I am with you there. I think this could be a bit of a blunder. Again, I haven't really purposely tested not doing this, which is something that, we should probably look at over time. But here it does mean Tice is facing down still a relatively awkward board. More damage than necessary is going to be coming out. And also it means it's more likely there's a chance that Tice kills 2 mercenaries from Luna in quick succession, maybe even on the same turn, which then can give Luna the double whammy off the bench, which can, again, weirdly enough, be a problem for Tice.
Yeah, and for Tice here, he has to calculate as though everything on Luna's side has plus 12 health from what we can see right now, because Luna can definitely get 2 nature abilities before Tice does anything. And so committing Muddy Footing plus Earth Stomp will definitely kill Malf here. And I think he can also leave Brukan just barely alive, which might be a benefit because we don't want the quick succession, right? But the bad thing for Tice here is the fact that the Brukan gets to get off its Chain Lightning pretty safely, and the Malf actually went for the Entangling Roots here. So the Samuro, the mirror does not get to attack. The Brukan has more health on it. And Luna has Malfurion alive for another turn, which is, I want to say, a disaster, but not necessarily. I think this could be room for Cookie, because now the snipe is guaranteed, because Luna did not go for the speed up with the Cenarian last turn, right? And she also got slowed by the Earth Stomp, but Tice does not want to take the snipe here. I just feel like maybe the extra health is something that Tice needs to get back into this?
I think Tice knows something big needs to happen, and it has to be the combo, right? It has to be the stomps from Diablo, because all of these mercenaries on Luna's side are relatively weak. The Malfurion's weak. The Brukan obviously is weak to the 2 greens that are on the board, and Samuro, yes, is at 52, but obviously with these multiple waves of AoE coming out, that is going to be a big deal. And I think Tice might be just trying to do the quick maths to work out whether he can even wipe the whole board this turn. I don't think he can, but it's close, right? It's pretty close with the double damage on the Brukan and his Samuro being able to swing too.
He can definitely kill Brukan and Malfurion if he wants. He can... I don't know if... I'm trying to work out if he can kill Malf and Samuro, right? Because the Diablo's going to deal 24 to everything, 48 to Brukan's case. If it deals 24 to Luna Samuro, it goes down to 28. So Tice's Samuro will be just short of killing that. So it looks like he's just going to go for the AoE on his Samuro, which will get rid of the Brukan because it also has the critical damage. And it leaves his Samuro a bit health. Well, it leaves the possibility to go mirror on the next turn, which I think is smart, right? Because you want something to potentially beat the endurance aura that is going to come off of Luna's bench here, I assume. She goes for Karen Diablo of her own. But this could also be a cookie spot.
Yeah, Ken Cookie wouldn't be the worst case if you're assuming then... Yeah, I think Ken Cookie, Stomp, and then you would assume Samuro dies, and then you go Diablo AoE.
Okay. She goes for the dynamic duo, though, which, I mean, this is the upshot of Tice going AoE because it guarantees his Samuro survives that turn. So now he has the flipper, right? He has the mirror image that can snipe the Samuro on Luna's side before Endurance Aura goes off, depending on how the speed tie goes. What Luna, I think, should be looking here is that can she curate a way where she can either get rid of Karen's first half on Tice's side before it even moves, or leave the Karen alive and get an Earth Stomp of her own. Because the worst outcome a lot of the time is you stomp, but you kind of remove that own slow because it kills the first half Karen, and second half Karen can aura on the next turn. Right. Very, very complicated stuff. I'm honestly not sure what Luna's supposed to do, but I would really like to see Tice go for the mirror on the Samuro here.
Yeah, just has to at least have a chance. I'm just still thinking about how the cookie would have impacted this differently, right? And if that would have made a difference, because you just remove Samuro from the game. That happens every single time, right? 2-speed cookie kills the Samuro, buffs the Ken and the Samuro that Luna has. Mainly the Ken would be the big deal for me. Luna is going to go for that AoE, well, double AoE effect, proc the reincarnate from Tice, and Tice is still in a rough spot, so don't get me wrong when I'm saying I'm interested about what if Luna brought Cookie out instead. That is not saying this was a misplay, she's now going to lose because of it. I'm just very interested to see like if we could rewind the game and just play Cookie and see how that would look, because it was such a good Cookie target.
For sure. I mean, it's easy to get baited. Sometimes the plus 15 health looks too good, and then you realize this is still losing to Karen Diablo. Doesn't matter. It's really hard to judge on the spot. But I want to shout out Luna's play there. I think it was very good understanding that she has to win a speed tie most of the time for her Samuro to survive anyway. So playing towards that outcome, she went for the AoE on Samuro, plus the Fire Stomp, which is enough to kill first half Karen from Tice. So he didn't even manage to get an Earth Stomp off that turn, which is enormous because like Luna can go for a mirror image this turn herself to try and beat that endurance aura. It doesn't kill the Karen straight up, but it allows her to get more damage with her Samuro before it dies to the big Earth Stomp combo from Tice, which now includes a cookie. So it's 30 damage AoE plus whatever the fish is.
Yeah, it's an absolute ton of extra damage, isn't it, with this Samuro still on the board, so you'll definitely take that, especially knowing that even if Luna doesn't get to actually kill the Ken, it is going to be weak enough that then the cookie off the bench will be able to do it. I feel like Ken is the most common victim of cookie shenanigans as well, so we'll see how this one pans out.
Okay, because the image is summoned, it actually becomes 36 AoE, right?
Yeah, the heel fish though.
Oh no, it's not 36 because she won the speed tie, so it's still just 30, the same thing. Yeah, it only adds if you're running Sash. That's my bad. I always forget that. Heal Fish, big deal. This Diablo is so jacked right now.
And also, the Ken is not snipeable right now on 31.
Yeah,
Like, that
exactly.
was a huge amount of health coming out there from that Heal Fish.
Yeah, and it had to be Heal Fish exactly right. If it, okay, no, the +5 +10 fish would have done it as well. I think Karen would have 5 less health here,
Right.
in that instance, and still out of range of the 20 damage from Cookie.
Yeah,
but
so 2 out of 3.
I mean, those 2 fish were the big deal here. I don't think the extra 15 damage fish to Luna's board would have been a very big deal, but this now means that Luna has less sustain on her mercs. The Cookie from Tice is also not snipeable because it got like healed. And it can, though, however, still lose to the Endurance or a play, which is a guaranteed outcome for Luna here. Because she can't snipe Karen, I think there's no questions about it. She should just go for the big 30 damage AoE, which also kills the Cookie. It's unfortunate that it is 1 damage short of killing the Karen, though. So in this instance for Luna, I think the Death Rattle fish that deals 15 to Tice's board is actually the best one for her.
Yeah. Since we're talking about phrases or word uses we can make up for this, we can have heal, deal, and meal fish. That kind of makes sense.
Okay, so clever play from Luna here. I was tunnel visioned on going for the fish here, but she realized if she didn't hit the deal fish, the deal 15, the Karen would survive and get an Earth Stomp. So what she actually did is play Cookie before that, which means she gets 1 less stomp, but it's still guaranteed to kill the Cookie on the other side and the Karen. I think that is extremely clever, and now she gets to isolate Diablo, and that's 100% win from that point. Very nicely done. I think Luna's just been on point today.
Yeah, I think she's full focused, and I also think there might have been some additional sleep involved in the past 24 hours or so, which may, as you will know just as much as anyone, have something to do with some more positive results here from Mercenaries and all game modes, of course. I've heard sleeping is quite healthy for the average human being, so it will help a lot. But yeah, I do like the way she approached that overall. Again, I was raising, should she have brought in Cookie for the snipe? But honestly, just seeing the way that played out, I think the snipe is cool, but not as strong as actually what Luna did achieve in that game. So really impressed so far, especially with the play there.
I think the big difference maker happened towards the beginning of this game, turn 2 to turn 3. I think Tice missed a guaranteed kill on Malfurion if he just it's not even overcommitting. Just commit enough things to it that it always dies before or after the heals go off, right? It's so easy to miss because Malfurion can be sneaky like that, but because it survived so long, gave Luna more sustain, and I think most importantly of all, healed her Samuro so it could keep going and knocking out more targets. It allowed Luna to kind of dictate the momentum in her favor, even though Tice got the big Cookie Karen Diablo combo off. Like the dynamic duo now has Cookie added, and the synergy is just insane there to summon the fish. And that's why I think the nature comp is the strongest deck in the lineup overall. But yeah, the Malfurion difference maker at the beginning allowed Luna to just make sure she could get the win as long as she could properly punish every turn from then on. And I think she capitalized on her Malfurion living as best as possible and did not leave any outs for Tice to get extra damage. And that last turn where she didn't tunnel vision on summoning another fish, I think was clever as well.
Yeah, really strong play overall, and it does make me slightly worried about the EU's chances of winning this series. Of course, it is only a single game, but I do think in general Luna is definitely firing on all cylinders, and I do think on the other side of that, like from what we've seen of Frozen, he did kind of just lose out on some ties, which really dictated some of the results of the previous games, but I do think Frozen's doing pretty well too with his overall plans. Did choose to mix it up a little bit in the last series, and it didn't really pan out too well. My only worry there is that slip from Tyres, because I at least personally do think it was a slip, not to guarantee a kill. Because if you leave a mercenary up longer than it should be alive, if that makes sense, then it's just doing more damage, doing more healing, just doing more stuff. We saw that from the Malfurion living, from the Samuro sticking around for a little bit longer as well. We saw it in the last series when it was actually Tice's Vol'jin that stayed alive and managed to get more damage off than you would imagine it should have been allowed to do as well. And it makes a huge difference when we're talking about oh, this mercenary has it's got 5 health that is keeping it out of range of a breakpoint of being killed. Like, that makes massive differences. And if you're pushing extra 10, 15, 20 damage that your opponent could have stopped you doing, then that does change the outcome of the game. And we saw there, that was not a coin flip decision. That was a conscious decision made by targeting that arrow somewhere else. So although a lot of the focus does come on the how visible the feeling bad of a speed tie is, it doesn't really always you make the case, right? A lot of these are conscious decisions by the players with predictable outcomes.
It's really all about knowing breakpoints too, because there's a world where leaving up Malf for 1 turn longer than expected is not strictly wrong, right? For one thing, maybe your opponent hasn't seen that pan out, and you have played that pan out, and there's a way that you can outplay them. But I think that only works if the Malf will end up at a breakpoint where a Cookie can snipe it. Otherwise, I think there's just no benefit to leaving up Malfurion for that long. And we saw it was at 10, or 11 was it? And then it had 2 abilities because the speed up remained 2 nature abilities that could go under Cookie Snipe and then get Malfurion to 23. And that just does not work out in any favorable way that I can fathom for the person that left Malfurion up. But now we do have another game on our hands here. I'm super curious what's going to get queued up. There's Shadow Samaros still left for both players, and of course the Diablo openers, where I think EU have a very interesting version that allows them to have more flexible openers, like the green to go along with the Varden Cairn can either be Diablo or Tavish, whereas I think that flexibility is lost from America's version because their Diablo off-bench potential is very bad in my opinion, because it's not gaining that much health from anything dying because it doesn't run the right weapon for that, and it still has to doom charge for 1 turn if it really wanted to get usage out of that weapon. But if you Diablo off the bench, most of the time you want to insta Firestomp.
Yeah, or at least just have the option as well of doing, if you're not ready for a Firestomp, you can just Apocalypse off the bench, right, if you really want, depending. But being forced into that early Doom charge is a little bit rough. And we saw it twice in the last series. Yes, you can actually get to the point where the damage will matter for you, but the fact that Doom Charge is taking that damage, we saw that Diablo on 10 health and dying to the flip against Tice earlier on, so we'll have to see if it can pan out any different going forward. But one thing I'm for sure though, that Magma Horns is definitely the 3rd best ability. I think the extra damage doesn't come out too often, but I do think it's going to be interesting just seeing how these mercenaries develop, because again, although I've not basically practiced Claws enough to know if it even enables breakpoints against certain comps and such, so I can't fully comment on this yet. But because Black Soulstone seems so obviously strong, I think people are potentially ignoring some of the equipment. It's very similar to what we've seen from some of the Tavish players, right? Using the extra aim shot damage, when honestly, I have been the most autopilot, wait, this gives me health and makes the trap stick around. Yes, I am using this and nothing else ever again in my life. But now, seeing the extra aim shot damage come through, if you're more reliant on setting up specific kill targets, because again, the game isn't all about max damage every turn, right? Because then AoE would be king a lot of the time, and AoE is strong, but we've seen the single target focus being very, very powerful, especially when it's the more expected sort of turnover from Cairn on board, then into Diablo if something else dies. But as you know, you've been doing, a lot of players have been doing over the course of this tournament, if you just laser focus Cairn, then Diablo coming off the bench just kind of without his partner is a bit what am I supposed to do now? And it gets very, very tricky.
I honestly am so excited for there to be a Merc that has 3 viable weapons. We have a handful that have 2 viable ones, and I'll tell you what, right before submission, maybe 2 hours before, Surrender and I were still arguing back and forth about what to put on Natalie. He wanted weapon 1. He wanted the DPS. That's the one that makes Anathema and the Shadow Beam deal 6 extra damage or something like that. And that does give some breakpoints as we were testing, but I convinced him to go for the no cooldown because I think the healing flexibility is a bit too strong. But I can definitely see a meta. Sorry, the weapons are not arranged here. I mean, Eye of Shadow. Sorry, 4 extra damage. And that can be very relevant in a different meta. No kidding. It might be relevant now. Maybe that's a way you can juke the MAM deck if you don't run Benediction, because it's not even that good in that deck or in that matchup anyway. Very interesting stuff. We'll see how that develops. Like we talked about the Rag weapon already, and going back to Tavish, that's probably the relevant one for this upcoming matchup. I'm still unconvinced as to each weapon, because like stacking explosives is not very often relevant, I would say. Like a lot of good players who are running the big caster openings, for example, the turn they choose to pop explosive, let's say you have 2 stacked, it deals 64 then to blues, right? They probably have their blues down to like 20 or 12 by that point, and they're like, okay, you can have your 2 explosives. It's not really dealing that much damage because my Mercs already tanked damage from other sources. I'm ready to let them go now and get rid of the explosive at the same time. I do think the stacking trap is very good against a less experienced player, and probably still good even against good players in a different situation. But the aim shot, that weapon, I think can really reward you for going for mind games, right? Because like, since you're not running the stack trap weapon, you don't insta-click explosive trap that every time it's active and off cooldown, right? You can go for a spot where maybe you expect your opponent to think you will go for explosive trap, and that means they're not going to touch Tavish that turn. And if they don't touch Tavish, then your aim shot is going to deal more damage. I just feel like Tavish is so well designed. I love it that it's got this mind game aspect to it that's really cool, and there's direct punishes for whether or not you damage Tavish.
Yeah, it's really tough as well because the abilities that have just plus health, like Eudora's abilities, or equipment, should I say, are very interesting as well. I know the newer pirates haven't really been fully explored, but I think the newer pirates do have more of a widespread in potential equipment use. Like Eudora has one where she, perfect, where you battle cry with a cannon straight away, so you don't necessarily have to spend a turn summoning a cannon. And then just to have one on the board, so that's very powerful. It will attack at the end of turn 1. But then there's a +2, +10 buff, which again, you always have to look at stats. Let's just look at what Cookie's done for the game. But then also these cannons dealing just more damage because your main damage ability also fires your cannons as well. So this is very tricky and probably will take a lot of time to work out if Cookie's ever deemed good enough or playable enough in any given meta. That's going to be a tricky one to do. Edwin Van Cleef as well is an interesting one because there's one equipment that really benefits pirates. You know, adjacent pirate abilities are 4 speed faster. That is ridiculous if pirates are strong. But then one I'm currently using when I'm playing Edwin is the assisted strike. That's 3 faster. And you always have immune, right? So you don't have to worry about combos because you're so much faster. You don't need to combo, or it's harder to combo, so you become immune anyway. So that's pretty good as well. And then the Kingpin's bounty one's a little bit harder because I think it's like almost like the Cookie effect, except it's slower and has a massive cooldown in that just dealing the damage to the enemies can be good, but getting those death blows can be a little bit tricky. So I'm not sure about that one yet, but it's just another thing as well with just of just like how well it can go with if you have these widespread equipments. It's just never that straightforward, and it's similar to, for example, Samuro, where we see players in this tournament, you know, in some comps they want to run Mirror Image, in some comps they want to run Burning Blade, because you want them for different things. As you well know, with the Sylvanas in the back, you want to be able to summon as many additional sort of death minions as possible to really juice up that Sylvanas. But for just raw stacking damage, obviously Burning Blade is extremely strong.
I'm glad that you talked about the Pirates because I have nothing to say about them. I played maybe 3 games in testing and said, this is trash, this can never win in competitive, the end. However, I also thought
you're part of the problem
at the beginning. Yeah, I mean, like, it's so hard with Mercs, right? Because you might be playing a comp, but you're just not playing it correctly yet, or you've missed one part of the crucial synergy, and that's what makes the deck. We don't know. Like, with the limited time we had for testing, Pirates did not work out, and so nobody submitted it. But who knows, after weeks go around, the meta keeps going back and forth, maybe there's a room for them to sneak in. But if not, balance patches can always happen. We just saw a fix to Cairn and Blink Fox that has significantly altered their power level. And as an extent, Diablo's power level. And we're seeing the best deck in this tournament not even include Cairn Diablo because of that. At least the one that's getting banned consistently. Still think there is room to leave up the MAM comp, but nobody's done it.
Look, there's the finals, okay? There's a chance.
Okay, maybe China will do it, right?
Yeah, maybe China will do it. We'll have to see. I know, I'm pretty sure they've banned it in previous matchups, if the teams had it at any given moment, of course. But I think they have banned it, so we'll see. Maybe there's a change. Maybe they're listening right now and they're like, you know what? She knows what she's on about. Let's leave it open.
Okay, so in terms of potential to leave MAM up, I think APAC and China were probably the only ones that could do that with any level of confidence because we submitted this deck on first submission, right? We knew about the deck way earlier than Americas and Europe did. So there's room to develop counter strategies against it, or maybe there wasn't that much time for Americas and Europe. But alas, we can talk about that later because we do have now the Nature comp versus the Diablo opener comp from Frozen, and once again, this has a very big turn 2 flip because the interaction of turn 1 for Frozen is to always slow everything with Varden by 2 and then slow something else by another 5, and the only choices are Malfurion and Brukan. I do think you have to hit Malfurion because that's the more threatening of the two. Yeah, and that means that Tamaro's fastest skill is at 5, slower than Endurance Aura. It means that Rukan's fastest skill, though, is at 3, which can tie Endurance Aura. And it can snipe Diablo before getting the Earth Stomp off. So here we have another big 50-50.
Prepare yourselves, chat. We're ready. I'm waiting for the spam to go on here, but yeah, Frozen does pretty much just have to go for this. There's no way to play around it. He just needs that Brukan to just trip over a little rock or something before he makes his turn, and then Frozen can pop off with the big Diablo response. So fingers crossed here. Again, I'm obviously like naturally rooting for EU, of course, but seeing Frozen take some pretty tough like speed ties.
Okay, this is the one.
Oh, look at Frozen's face. Look at his little face. He loves it. He's like, he cannot believe it. He did the thing.
Okay. But last time this happened, right, he lost the flip. And I said, it's probably not even that bad for Nature if they lose the flip. Because the mouth doesn't actually die. And it can go for the healing like this. So a lot of that AoE is immediately negated. However, the big deal is that if you have to go for the healing with Mouth and you're slowed by Varden, you're extremely slow by the next turn because you didn't use the Nature Speed Up skill from Malfurion. And now Frozen has the capability of fighting back with another big AoE combo. There is the Baron Geddon with the Living Bomb equipment that makes it go off twice, so it's 24 AoE on everything, 48 on reds. Very relevant breakpoint for the Malfurion right now, and you can trigger that Living Bomb either with Cairn's Earth Stomp or Varden's Flurry.
Yeah, we can see now this is the complete opposite of the single target strategy I was talking about. This is Frozen just doing max AoE damage basically every single turn that you possibly can. With this slowed Brukan as well, this is a little bit tough, isn't it? Like 6 speed, Muddy Footing must feel pretty bad. The Chain Lightning being very slow as well. Did he just Q? Oh no, he Q'd Chain Lightning. For a second I blinked and thought he Q'd Muddy Footing. I was like, wait, you have Chain Lightning, so you play Chain Lightning. That's the general rule I adhere to as Brukan.
Fair enough. Frozen also cleverly putting his Cairn to the far left because he wants to give it a chance to survive Chain Lightning, whereas if you put any Merc you put in the middle is guaranteed to get hit twice by Chain Lightning if Brukan is running the appropriate equipment for that. If you put it on the flank, it's only 50-50 that it gets targeted twice. Okay, here we go. This is gonna kill the Malfurion. Deal a lot of damage to everything else. No cold snap spots available for Tycer, but he did end up switching back to the Muddy Footing, which does still have implications for the next turn, because I believe this Cookie can safely snipe the Cairn. Tice has nature spell damage, and so Cookie is dealing 26 to a red here. If he wants. I'm not sure if it's correct, but I'm always baited by Cookie, so... Gotta be good, right? Because it's the only thing that moves before Varden and Baron Geddon in this situation, because Tice is giga slowed by Stomp and Flurry on his 2 older Mercs.
Yeah, I think so. I think the only worry is there a world where Tice plays Cookie, snipes the Cairn fine, but then only Samuro dies, and then does that make, with the 2 blues on board, this board a little bit weak to play Cairn into? Like, is that ever a problem? I don't know, and it might well not be, because then Brakan's likely to die soon after. But I'm just wondering if he's a little bit worried about actually getting this Cairn and Diablo down together at a reasonable point in the game.
I'm just really worried because I think the Cookie snipe allows Tice to maybe prevent Cold Snap from just deleting his turn here, right? Isn't it good? I mean, the Diablo now has a chance to speed tie the Varden and get a move in before Cold Snap, but I think if Frozen just clicks second button on Varden, guaranteed Samuro and Brukan don't do anything this turn.
That is very true. And there's no way, I guess, Doom Charge, right? I know he's not going for it, but I was wondering whether like Doom Charge ever makes an effect here.
Well, no. Wait. Yeah, if the Doom Charge goes first, right? But that
Yes,
then is
yeah,
also just
first.
a flip. Oh,
Yeah.
I don't know if you can take that. I mean, I'm not even sure if Tice is thinking about Cold Snap. It's like one of those abilities that I'm always looking for it when I'm playing Varden, but
Yeah.
when I'm playing against Varden, I just forget and I get so blindsided. So I think maybe Tice can go for like Apocalypse Cairn at least. So if you do get a Diablo turn, it's getting Cairn down to second half. But then again, it's not even that good because Cairn isn't doing anything relevant this turn. It's Endurance Aura at the end of the turn, which essentially is just gain taunt.
Oh.
Okay, there it is, the snap, and
It's
it
a
won
big
the flip,
pass.
so Diablo gets no move.
Oh my, that was just a free turn.
Right.
That's
and
insane.
Cookie health could have prevented the snap.
Oh. Imagine if I told you in Mercenaries sometimes you just get to have 2 turns, like one completely free turn to go. That is insane. And now Brakan on 12 is almost certainly going to get blasted away as well.
There is an Endurance Aura tie here though, so this could be a very, very big deal. If Frozen wins the tie, he can kill Brukan before the Chain Lightning that we were talking about could have happened a bit earlier potentially, but can still happen now if Tice wins the Endurance Aura tie. And there's still the Nature spell damage as well, so it's dealing increments of 19. Big deal. Every point of extra damage on the Geddon especially is relevant in my opinion. And also, if he wins the speed tie, the Fire Stomp gets to go before anything, and that is the 24 AoE on Cairn and 48 to the blues.
One of the problems that Tice is going to face here.
He won another tie! Where's the shocked Pikachu face, Frozen?
He's used to it now. He's won every tie this game. He's like, yeah, it's back to normal.
All right.
The worry here as well, I think, for Tice, I mean, I'm pretty sure he's just Omega dead this game. But because we've seen it so often, we're very used already in these series to seeing Varden's Death Rattle freeze get unlocked by the opponent's Ragnaros. Well, as you can see, there's no Ragnaros in this team for the Tice. So even if like this board gets AoE down and say Varden dies, it will freeze one of the minions and it will stay frozen for the next turn, which then gives Frozen... this is difficult, isn't it? It will turn into a block of ice for the next turn and not be able to act, which will give Frozen again, initiative, right, on that follow-up turn, even though he's the one losing Mercenaries.
Do you think Frozen will be mad if we call him Frank just for purposes of clarity as we cast Mercenaries?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well,
but I think the
Tice
more
has
problem is
opportunity.
everyone will be like, who?
Frozen's name is Frank Zhang. It's on his Twitter, so
There you go.
yeah.
Solved.
Anyway, Tice did attempt to go for an Earth Stomp setup of his own, but it doesn't quite work because he can get stomped the other way and additionally slowed by Varden. So in that world, Frozen's next Endurance Aura Frank's next Endurance Aura will always go first. There it is. Finally won some ties, and it's a big deal. But honestly, like, I was surprised that there was such a strong follow-up because I kind of thought Nature can still get there even after losing the T2 flip. Because of the Malfurion healing, right? But then again, that one game pan out doesn't necessarily mean Nature never wins if they lose the T2 flip, because there was a cold snap spot that could have been prevented by a cookie coming down instead of a Diablo. It's like so many different pan outs. Like, with more time, we could test all these different ones. And honestly, like, Mercs can become flow chartable. It'll be a very, very long flow chart, but you can learn so much if you have just put in the time for the prep and get a big advantage that way. But bear in mind, both Americas and EU are playing decks that they did not submit at the beginning of the tournament. So they probably had significantly less prep time than China. And that, I think, will make China a very tough opponent in the finals.
Yeah, I do agree, and I agree with you about the flowchart as well. When I first started playing Mercenaries, I did wonder if there's ever just a simple... Yeah, because I made loads of notes when I was running into certain matchups of like, okay, turn 1, I should do this against this comp. Turn 2, I should do this, and so on, so on. But one of the problems is, let's just pretend someone just made a flowchart of every comp matchup of what you're supposed to do. Well, if that gets public, then people will play differently potentially, right? Like, not every single comp has such linear strategies. Maybe outside of turn 1, obviously. Turn 1's pretty limited a lot of the time. But that if you know what your opponent's going to do because you assume they're following this like perfect little path for the route to victory, you can just push them off it by doing something different, right? We saw, for example, earlier on, Tice kind of got caught by the roots from Malfurion with Samuro. And I think when I was casting a match you were playing in, I'm not sure if it was you or Surrender actually, but someone, both players did roots on the Samuro, and both players went for the AoE on the Samuro.
Oh,
and
that
I
was
was making the point.
Yeah,
and that I was making the point. What's very interesting in a scenario like that is if you think roots is the correct play and it's a mirror match, then surely, if you're expecting the AoE from your opponent, if you respect that they also see that roots is good, then should you just not roots that turn, let them AoE if that's what you're expecting, and then roots the turn after to 100% lock them out of a move. So it's very, very interesting that although there's a perfect way to play, maybe, humans play the game, right? So you can always change that around.
Certainly. I mean, again, I think even in that world, it is flow chartable because there's still a finite amount of outcomes in Mercs, but it's a very, very big number, and there's so many permutations. There's different openers. Ain't nobody got the time to do that for just one matchup when there's so many different Mercs that you can play. So yeah, I'm just saying that as long as you've put in more reps, you should on average be able to be more familiar with the different pan outs.
100%,
You should have a better understanding of where to go when your opponent does something that's a little bit different from the standard. Yeah, wow. Such a fun game. I just seen on Twitter now that Celestalon's very excited that I'm calling the Anduin comp Mams because Malfurion, Anduin, Mukla, and that's the name of his dog, I think.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. Well,
fortunate coincidences.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? There's this. What's really funny about this, where right now, is there's so much to talk about in even these mirror matches, right? We're talking about basically, this best of 5 2 match in a row and mirrored lineups. And that's without anyone playing everything else that's available as well. And you have pointed it out once or twice that because these lineups are mirrored because of mainly the resubmission, if this was like the original EU versus NA lineups, things would get very wild because they were different for a start. They weren't completely mirrored, and you'd probably really start to see who just simply had the stronger overall lineup, or at least you'd see who has better control over the decks they've chosen. Whereas this, even in what you can argue, and this is true of every format, this is the same as constructed, right? If it's mirror matches back to back on mirror lineups, it does get a little bit silly to an extent. We know that as well as anyone else. But even with mirrors, we are seeing players like either make mistakes, make different decisions, change strategies between matchups. So we saw Frozen do 2 different things in the same matchup twice, basically.
Yes.
So even with mirrors, with limited mercenaries, with limited numbers of abilities, things are still up for debate. So that is pretty exciting overall. We are going to see, though, Luna jump in and Hunter Ace, of course, join us for this next game. And it is, again, going to be that sort of that Diablo opening here with the
Yeah.
Varden here for Team EU.
I don't think it's necessarily Diablo open for Huntress and Tice's version, right? Because they're not running the attack weapon on Diablo, and they've got the cookie instead of the Geddon. And they have the Tavish with the health weapon, which I think is a very important deal if you want to have that potential of running Tavish in the opener.
Sure.
And this is Huntress now, and I think he has been the most willing to experiment with alternate openers out of everyone in this tournament. He has such good instincts for how to approach a situation that he's never necessarily seen before or only rarely seen, even with maybe less prep time put in than some of the other players. So it's going to be a big deal now that the full knowledge is on the side of EU, because Americas now only have their Shadow Samuro deck left, which I've said time and again, only has one real opener that I've seen, at least the version that all the teams have submitted with Ragnaros at this point. The version that EU submitted on day one with the cookie can maybe change up its opener, but I don't think there's any room for that with the Ragnaros version. And so Huntress can try and take advantage of that. Is he going to put like even double green in the opener? Is that ever a thing? Or is he going to go for the tried and true Karin Varden Tavish / Karin Varden Diablo?
Yeah, it's a tough one as well. And also, I'm sure these players are really feeling the effects right now because they know how important these points are. They know the pressure. And I'm sure this has been true, and you will know a lot better than I will, of course, is this isn't only, say, for example, Luna and Frozen as a team. It's Luna, Frozen, and the ton of other players across the other formats. So, especially for the Americas, obviously the Battlegrounds team has been doing a lot of the heavy lifting. And if that's the case, I imagine as a player, and you've been on the not heavy lifting segment, that you will really feel even more sort of pressure to perform, at least at this late stage of the tournament. So the layers upon layers of pressure are getting really ridiculous for these players, especially because we know the overall winner of this series, and by series I mean Battlegrounds Constructed and Mercenaries, will go on to the final and face China. And when this is a full region versus region tournament, bragging rights for me must be the main prize.
Yeah, I have nothing to say about that, so we're moving to the next topic. Casper did end up going for the Tavish opener here, which I think this is the one he is very used to playing versus the Shadow Samuro opener. So because of this, you're not all in on trying to win a turn 2 flip of Endurance Aura to get Fire Stomp. You just kind of have Tavish hanging around there, very difficult to kill with the cookie and the weapon health, bringing it to the grand total of 102. Ridiculous to see a number that big. And you have these aim shots constantly threatening to deal critical damage to the blues. Obviously on this turn, it's pretty easy for Luna to prevent that from getting the full damage if she wants. But from turn 2 onward, Casper will be threatening the explosive trap, which is like, okay, if you don't touch my Tavish from now on, because we have the weapon that lets the traps stack and stay in place as long as they aren't triggered, then the aim shot will guaranteed get max damage from that point. As for Huntress's opening move, I think it's just pretty much attack the Samuro with the Karin. You go for Flurry always. Varden usually only has one button, but we saw a Cold Snap last game. Very happy about it. And then the Tavish can go on, I suppose, Vol'jin as the biggest threat here. For Luna, I'm really not sure what she focuses, because if she kills Varden here, Diablo comes in and is very threatening. And you don't necessarily kill Tavish that fast for the reasons we laid out a while ago. So she's going for the Karin here, which I think is a pretty smart decision. Let's see how that pans out. The Karin attack does mean that Casper is down to second half, and sometimes while that may look bad, the second half Karin is not slowed by any effect. It's still able to get the Endurance Aura off, and it's not capable of having its turn stopped, right? To a speed tie, for example, because if the Karin lived at 6 health there, I think Luna could have one of her 3 speed abilities try and snipe that before Karin does anything here. So the attack is probably correct from Casper. And don't be fooled by the speeds on screen right now. It's not accounting for the Vol'jin weapon as well.
Yeah, and you said, we're talking about the Varden having one ability mostly, but we are going to see a Cold Snap again from Huntress with this Samuro on 7. It looks like he's going to queue that Cold Snap up and try and beat Luna to the punch here with this Endurance Aura, and it looks like it's it's going to pay off as far as I can see it with this slow beforehand, or potentially pay off at least. So let's see what happens here. Is the snap going to go? Obviously, we know the explosive trap's going to be there.
Vol'jin went first.
Oh, so the snap
So-
misses, right?
Yeah, it does. I'm trying to work out if the snap is really worth it because Luna there had two skills at speed 3, the Vol'jin AoE and the Natalie laser. If the Vol'jin AoE and Natalie laser both go off and kill Karin before it moves, then you cold snap a Samuro and it dies, but like the two blues already moved, so you're not really getting that much value from the cold snap. And then in the world where your endurance aura goes first, though, the snap is insane because you just delete the blue turn. But again, I feel like the person with more skills put into the speed tie is more likely to go first. No confirmation on this, so I'm not sure if Andre should have maybe gone for Flurry if he felt that was unlikely, but he was going for the best possible outcome play, which is oftentimes correct in Mercs as well. Just really hard to evaluate.
Here now with Diablo subbing in for Ken. It's going to be I always find it so tricky, and Diablo is a relatively strong mercenary by itself, but it is a lot weaker than without Ken, right? So I always find it tricky on how to navigate turns like this when you're bringing in Diablo as a single minion, and what to really prioritize, especially against Shadow. I think it's fair to say that Diablo is probably not going to Fire Stomp. It would only realistically deal 12 this turn, and then even with the Varden dealing additional damage with the AoE, it still wouldn't be enough to clear these blues off, right? And that's even if Celine doesn't go for a heal this turn.
I do think Celine heal is... I'm really not sure how to evaluate it here, honestly, because if you look at the combination of Vol'jin, Karin, Natalie, it's actually pretty weak. Like, the synergy is just not there because Vol'jin and Natalie are already moving before Endurance Aura, and for the same reason, slowing your opponent doesn't actually give you that many additional benefits if you use Earth Stomp because your blues are already so fast. So I wonder if Casper can just abuse the fact that the blues are just kind of sitting there dealing not too much damage to Hunter Ace's greens. And, you know, even if they get healed up, again, it's relatively low DPS, and just try and focus the Karin instead. Isolate that from Luna, and that's the entire strategy that the MAMS comp goes for versus Shadow Samuro as well.
Yeah, the only thing with that is I think generally that does include killing Vol'jin off, right? So at some early-ish point in the game, and leaving Natalie stranded, at least in my experience. And one thing I do just want to highlight is even though the Endurance Aura doesn't do what it normally does in the comp here for Luna right now, I do think the Endurance Aura that turn was sick, because that Diablo was aimed at Vol'jin, and the Endurance Aura, of course, made the Diablo hit Cairn, which allowed Celine to get off that heal, and suddenly Celine and Vol'jin are very healthy right now. So regardless of whether those plays from, say, Hunter Ace or either were correct, I'm going to choose to say, or not, Luna just having the heads up to basically skip a turn to an extent, like miss an attack, should I say, on Cairn that turn, and just say, I'm just going to taunt, even though all it is getting taunt. It really did pay off, because look at the health on that Vol'jin. Okay, don't look at it now, because it's nearly dead, but still.
So the whole reason for Hunter Ace trying to attack Vol'jin the last turn was to set up a better Fire Stomp. So Luna with the Aura did get the confirmation that that could not happen, even if all the Aura was doing was essentially getting taunt. I think it's a good spot. And she does manage to get the big AoE damage from the blue combination, which is pretty significant here because it allows her own Diablo to come in for some big stompage. The Earth Stomp also went off on the other side, so Luna's Endurance Aura has a speed tie with the Bear Trap from Tavish. Even if the Tavish wins that speed tie, Luna's Fire Stomp is going to deal tons of damage here. Going to kill off 2 Mercs, put the Diablo within very killable range of Rag. And that will put Hunter Ace on having to win with his remaining bench, which is Cookie Rag, I believe.
Yeah, I think so, yeah. And I just want to say, I think Luna is Omega ahead, and this is one of those
Mm-hmm.
scenarios that I've brought up a few times where just because your opponent has more mercenaries than you at any given time does not mean they are winning, because Luna can deal 1,000,000 damage this turn, likely to just clean the whole board up, and then suddenly the rag cookie like isn't going to be it, right? I don't think it's going to be able to deal with this too well.
It does
Especially,
definitely look like Luna's ahead to me, but I wouldn't call it just yet. I'm pretty sure this Diablo gets to survive the turn for Hunter Ace. And he'll also have a bear at the end of this. And there's the Varden Death Rattle. That's the big difference maker, right? What if something big gets frozen here? Oh, okay, it doesn't survive the turn. My bad, my bad. The Die Insect's critical damage always happens there for the kill.
And yeah, because it always deals with the bear, right? Which is the key thing. There wasn't even a 50-50 there or anything. So huge hits there from Luna. And now, go on.
There's no freeze. Sorry, I forgot about the rag weapon. It's not bugged. It's always unfrozen right now. So great.
Yeah, it's just huge, and this was it, right? Like, Luna cleared the whole board with this, and then because there's no the Varden damage comes out, of course, but because there's no freeze, Luna stays ahead, right? And also bear in mind that that was a Die Insect turn, so Meteor is still available. So then there's now the combination of being able to go for the I always forget the Apocalypse from Diablo, and then Meteor too, just to pump tons of extra damage if needed. It's a really big deal. It's so much damage. And Cairn, even though likely to obviously die from Cookie this turn, from Hunter Race, there's still a whole second half of Cairn knocking about next turn. So this is looking tough at best.
Yeah, and the Cairn second half is relevant because if you don't get rid of it, it can Earth Stomp / Endurance Aura, which can make one person's Die Insect / Meteor happen before the other person, and that DPS is very, very important. So even though Hunter Ace is going to get a nice chunk of health on his Mercs here, I think Luna should be able to
He went for bleed.
This down. Ooh. I'm curious why.
So this is to try and do something about winning the long game, I guess, because again, the bleeds will just tick away. The problem is, and I'm the person who talks about this bleed move the most, problem is, I think it just didn't matter either way. I think you were right when breaking it down. The health from the snipe on the Cairn is nice, but it just wouldn't have been enough. Luna takes the victory, takes the series overall for Team Americas. And I do, again, just want to highlight that I think Luna specifically in these past two series today has played very well.
I think Frozen has as well. Like, there was clearly a bit of hesitation between what to bring in position for that one game where he was on the Tavish deck. You start Geddon or Tavish, and one of them ended up working out better than the other, but it's more dependent, I think, on what happens on turn 2. Luna, though, I think with her full concentration and being rested, wow, she's a force to be reckoned with. Yeah, I mean, she's been able to spot these situations very cleanly, and I think I misidentified the power level of Vol'jin and Natalie at the spot where I was recommending that Tice go after the Cairn. I was like, that seems pretty good, right? Because if you go after a blue, then the Diablo comes out. But I kept forgetting, Tice is not playing the MAM comp, even though all of his things don't take critical damage from the casters. The AoE combo of Vol'jin Vol'jin Curse of Weakness into Natalie's Anathema is 34 AoE without any critical damage.
It's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah, and without any real sustain either, even though, like you said, it's not crazy critical, it's not popping off, but it's enough damage to make a difference. Like, that is absolutely huge when the sustain isn't really coming back the other way. So yeah, I think the Americas team did a great job there. I think the players, as we've mentioned, definitely benefit. I think all the players as well benefit from having a little bit more rest and everything go a little bit smoothly. So I'm really happy, especially with Mercenaries, that the players did get to play with a relatively smooth experience. So that was super cool. Of course, this does mean we're done for now, but we are not done with Mercenaries for the day, because of course we have this all over again later on with the finals, and I can't wait, because we're going to get China versus whoever we're going to get it between EU and Americas. So that is going to be it for now. We're going to dive over to Battlegrounds soon enough. But of course, we have to go to a break while we switch out players and also switch out the casters, as Sottle and Lorinda are going to be joining us as our resident Battleground experts. So we'll be right back with some more of the Hearthstone Global Invitational.